The Earth in 2081. The year was 2081, and the Earth had become a shadow of its former self. The skies, once a vibrant blue, were now a perpetual gray, choked with the remnants of industrial excess and the fallout from countless wars. The oceans, once teeming with life, had turned into vast, lifeless expanses of acidic brine. Humanity had pushed the planet to its limits, and now it teetered on the edge of collapse. But even as the world crumbled around them, people clung to the hope that somewhere, out in the vastness of space, there might be a solution to their problems. A new home, a new beginning, a way to escape the inevitable. Dr. Evelyn Carter was one of the few who still believed in that hope. A brilliant astrophysicist and one of the last remaining members of the once prestigious Global Space Exploration Initiative, she had spent her entire career searching for answers in the stars. But as the years passed and the Earth's condition worsened, the initiative's funding had dried up, and its missions had been reduced to a handful of unmanned probes sent to the farthest reaches of the solar system. Evelyn had watched as her colleagues abandoned their posts one by one, until she was the only one left in the crumbling facility, staring at the flickering screens that displayed the data from the probes. It was on a cold gray morning in early March that Evelyn noticed something unusual in the data. One of the probes, designated Probe 17, had been sent to explore the outer edges of the Kuiper Belt, a region of space beyond Neptune that was home to countless icy bodies and dwarf planets. The probe had been silent for months, its signal lost in the vastness of space. But now, suddenly, it was transmitting again. Evelyn's heart raced as she analyzed the data. The signal was weak, barely detectable, but it was there, and it was unlike anything she had ever seen before. The data was a chaotic jumble of numbers and symbols, but as Evelyn sifted through it, she began to notice patterns. There were sequences that repeated at regular intervals, like a heartbeat, and others that seemed to form intricate, almost organic shapes. It was as if the probe had encountered something out there, something that defied all known laws of physics and biology. Evelyn's mind raced with possibilities. Could it be a message from an alien civilization? Or perhaps some kind of natural phenomenon, something that had never been observed before? She worked tirelessly for days, poring over the data, trying to make sense of it, but the more she studied it, the more she realized that it was beyond her understanding. The patterns were too complex, too alien. They seemed to shift and change as if they were alive, as if they were trying to communicate something that her human mind could not comprehend. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important hidden within the data, something that could change everything. It was late one night as she sat alone in the dimly lit control room that Evelyn made a decision. She would go to the Kuiper Belt herself. She would find Probe 17 and see for herself what it had encountered. It was a reckless, almost suicidal plan, but she didn't care. She had spent her entire life searching for answers, and now, finally, she felt like she was on the verge of discovering something truly extraordinary. The journey to the Kuiper Belt would take months, even with the fastest spacecraft available. Evelyn knew that she would be risking her life, but she was willing to take that risk. She spent the next few weeks preparing for the mission, gathering supplies, and making the necessary modifications to the spacecraft. She didn't tell anyone about her plans. There was no one left to tell. The world had moved on, consumed by its own problems, and Evelyn was alone. The launch was uneventful. The spacecraft, a small, sleek vessel that had once been used for short-range missions, lifted off from the abandoned launch pad and soared into the gray sky. Evelyn watched as the Earth receded behind her, a pale, lifeless orb hanging in the void. She felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of relief. She was finally free, finally on her way to discovering the truth. The journey was long and monotonous. Evelyn spent most of her time in the cramped cockpit, staring out at the endless expanse of space. The stars were distant and cold, their light barely reaching her. She felt small and insignificant, a tiny speck of life, adrift in an uncaring universe. But she also felt a strange sense of peace. Out here, far from the chaos and destruction of Earth, she could almost forget about the problems that plagued humanity. Almost. As the weeks turned into months, Evelyn began to notice something strange. The stars, which had once been fixed points of light in the distance, seemed to be shifting. At first she thought it was her imagination, but as the days passed, the shifts became more pronounced. The stars were moving, not in the slow, predictable arcs of celestial bodies, but in sudden, jerky motions, as if they were being pulled by some unseen force. Evelyn's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The spacecraft was being drawn towards something massive and powerful, something that was bending the very fabric of space around it. She checked the instruments, but they were useless. The readings were erratic, fluctuating wildly as if they were being affected by some kind of interference. Evelyn tried to adjust the course, to steer the spacecraft away from whatever was pulling her in, but it was no use. The controls were unresponsive, and the spacecraft continued to drift towards the unknown. And then, suddenly, it was there. A massive, dark shape loomed in the distance, blotting out the stars. It was unlike anything Evelyn had ever seen before. It was not a planet, nor a star, nor a black hole. It was something else entirely, something that defied all known laws of physics. It was a vast, swirling mass of darkness, with tendrils of shadow reaching out into the void. It pulsed with a strange, rhythmic energy, like the beating of a heart, and Evelyn could feel it even through the walls of the spacecraft. It was alive. The spacecraft was drawn closer and closer until it was swallowed by the darkness. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she stared out at the void. There was nothing to see, nothing to hear, just an endless, suffocating blackness. And then, suddenly, the darkness began to shift. Shapes began to form, swirling and coalescing into something that resembled a face. It was a face unlike any Evelyn had ever seen, with features that were both familiar and alien, human and otherworldly. It was a face that seemed to contain the entirety of existence. A face that stared into her soul and saw everything she had ever been, everything she ever would be. And then it spoke. The voice was not a voice, but a presence, a force that filled her mind and her body, overwhelming her senses. It was a voice that was not made of sound, but of thought, of emotion, of pure, unadulterated knowledge. It spoke of things that Evelyn could not comprehend, of realities that existed beyond the limits of human understanding. It spoke of the birth and death of universes, of the infinite cycles of creation and destruction, of the true nature of existence. And it spoke of humanity, of its insignificance, its fragility, its inevitable demise. Evelyn tried to scream, but no sound came out. She tried to close her eyes, but the darkness was everywhere, inside her and outside her, consuming her. She felt herself being pulled apart, her mind and body unraveling, dissolving into the void. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The darkness receded, and Evelyn found herself back in the cockpit of the spacecraft. The instruments were working again, and the stars were back in their rightful places. But something was different. The stars were no longer cold and distant, they were alive, pulsing with a strange rhythmic energy like the beating of a heart. And Evelyn knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that they were watching her. She tried to make sense of what had happened, but it was impossible. The experience had shattered her understanding of reality, leaving her with more questions than answers. What had she encountered out there? What was the true nature of the universe? And what did it mean for humanity? As the spacecraft drifted back towards Earth, Evelyn felt a deep existential dread settle over her. She had sought knowledge, but what she had found was beyond comprehension. She had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back. And now, she knew that humanity was not alone in the universe. There were things out there, things that defied all understanding, things that were ancient and powerful, and utterly indifferent to the fate of humanity. When Evelyn finally returned to Earth, she was a changed woman. She tried to share her experience, to warn others of what she had seen, but no one would listen. The world was too consumed by its own problems, too focused on its own survival, to care about the mysteries of the cosmos. And so, Evelyn kept her knowledge to herself, knowing that it was too dangerous, too terrifying, to be shared. But as she looked up at the stars, now alive with a strange, pulsating energy, she knew that the truth was out there, waiting to be discovered. and she knew that one day humanity would have to face it, whether it was ready or not. The Earth, in 2081, was a fragile, dying world. But it was also a world on the brink of a revelation that would change everything and nothing, a revelation that would reveal the true nature of existence and the terrifying insignificance of humanity. And as Evelyn stared up at the stars, she knew that the end was only the beginning.